It doesn't seem possible. It's just too much of a reach. Science doesn't prove it. Where's the dead one? No one has a dead one. There aren't any bones. There's no teeth. A car would have hit one and killed it by now. I have hunted all my life and never seen one. I'm from the country, raised cows since I was born. I've been a logger for 30 years and never saw nothing. There's millions and millions of people on this earth. Someone would have a good video by now. All those cell phones, all those game cameras. Where's one good picture? Valid. All valid points. Very logical, very sensible, very comforting. Until 800 pounds of legend shows up. Now you can smell him. His eyes luminesce. You're close enough to hear his voluminous breathing. Science and logic just caught the last bus out of here. You are now facing what shouldn't and can't be. Standing on the shards of a broken paradigm, you don't need a watch to know what time it is. It's 0 Squatch 30. John, thanks for coming in tonight to do 0 Squatch 30 with us. Great to talk to you. Uh, if you wouldn't mind telling the folks, give us some background on the kind of area you're from, the area that we're talking about, how you come about being where you were when these things unfolded.
Well, first of all, it's nice to be here. I come from countryside, not really backwoods, but I grew up in the country. A lot of woods and fields around us, good hunting areas, and places like that. Until about, I don't know, 5 years ago, I finally moved out. But that's where I grew up, was out in
Right.
wooded areas.
So you grew up like we did, like a lot of people did, just not really in the city, but not really 10 miles out in the country. They're just kind of a rural countryside kind of a setting.
Didn't have any close neighbors, really.
Yeah.
My closest neighbor was probably a quarter mile up the road from us, and we had almost 30 acres somewhere in there that we hunted on and could go fishing on, and or whatever we wanted to do, and cut wood. And growing up, we always played in the woods and stuff like that.
And like most of Appalachia, probably not too far away from game lands, national forest, river valleys, things like this. Just the typical bit like you get in Appalachia.
Yes.
Where you were, you said neighbors were around, but not too close, a ways away, stuff like that. Would there have been people that might have had livestock, chickens, things like that? Just
At that time, we do have neighbors that were across the street from us. Kind of where we were located, there was a dirt road that right off the main highway, and just across there was neighbors at that time that were living there years ago. Did have a few chickens, some goats.
so typical stuff.
Yeah,
Typical stuff.
no cows or anything like that.
Right.
We had horses,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
okay.
that's about all. We had cattle, but that was before I was born.
Yeah, that pretty well paints the picture. Is there any lore or tales or anything that you remember the old people saying about, or saying they would hear things, or anyone ever say they saw anything, or it was a pretty, it wasn't really mentioned or anything, so there was no tales going around about this certain monster or anything in these woods?
Nothing.
Okay, all right,
Nothing
good.
at all.
Now, your relatives had a farm there, and you were coming around and you were helping out, as you were telling me. If you don't mind telling the story, what was going on?
Well, I was probably between 10 and 12,
Mm-hmm.
and I started doing that. And at that time, we started hearing sounded like loud screaming, like a horror movie, a woman screaming in a horror movie. Mm-hmm. This is anywhere between 9 o'clock at night and 11 o'clock. It was always seemed to be right in with the same couple of hours. The the house that I was in had some pretty good sized windows that opened up. And so at nighttime, we always sit in the kitchen and just talk, and the breeze coming in, and we'd sit around and talk and stuff. And the first time it happened, we all just kind of sat there and looking at each other. And I looked over at my dad, and I was like, because I was young, I was like, well, what was that? And he says, I think it was probably a bobcat or a fox.
It's always a bobcat or a fox.
And I was like, I've never heard that. I don't care if I hear it again.
Yeah.
And well, that summer, that matter of fact, for the next, it was like 4 nights in a row it did this.
Mm-hmm.
Then we didn't hear nothing for a while. And I believe it was the following summer we heard it again. And
now, do you think so it might even have been like the same month? Because a lot of people think that there's a cyclicalness to this, like maybe a migration. Or something.
I think it might have been right around the same time.
Okay.
Both years at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, and again, he's like, I said, are you sure that's what that is? Because that's awful loud. And that's, I mean, if you hear it, it makes the hair stand right up on the back of your neck. And my grandmother at that time actually lived about 100 yards away from the house. And I used to be able to walk to her house without a flashlight. I wasn't afraid of the dark. But I used to be able to walk to her house from our house to her house with no problem. After I heard that, I always had a flashlight with me. It was a good sized light, and I always kept our dog with me. Whether he'd help me or not, but it felt safe having the dog with me. Probably take off running.
A little bit of heads up.
Yeah, something. They can sense things before we do. So, but no, I never. As far as that went, definitely something that I've never heard, and since then I've never heard it again.
Now, if we so that's around the old kind of hobby farmstead. And if we fast forward a few years, we come into folks are getting older, and you're helping out, and you're working on the fields and keeping things up. And what was going on then? What happened then?
Well, we always had paths mowed between goldenrod field that had a lot of, your goldenrod and hawthorn trees, crab apples, good grouse pheasant hunting area and stuff like that. And of course that met up with the woods, but we always kept paths, at least 3 of them opened up that went down in the woods because we used firewood. We had fireplace. We could go down and haul firewood out of there, and hunting season, everybody walked the paths going back in there. So we always kept them mowed down pretty neat, pretty nice.
Yeah.
My father was the one that mainly did that all the time. And it was, I was probably 15, because I know I wasn't driving yet, but I know I was close to it. 14 or 15. And when my father got sick for a while, and I kind of took over the mowing and stuff, to open trails up. And I was, this one summer, which I don't know if this is the same month about with the other two, the screams and that, but it was definitely in the summer. But I was mowing a trail, and I always go down this one trail.
So just to be clear for people that don't live right here, you're on a tractor with a mower behind it, pulling like a bush hog type of thing.
No, actually, it was a mower was under, had a 48-inch deck under.
Oh, okay, like an Alice or something.
It was actually a Cub International.
Okay,
it was a 48.
So it's an old one. We're making a little bit of noise as we're heading down through the trail. Okay, good.
It wasn't extremely loud, but it was loud.
Mm-hmm.
And then every time I'd go down these trails, I'd get to the end of them, and I always had a spot that was made for turning around to go back up the other direction because we kept 2 swaths.
Yeah.
And I started back this path. It was the last path. That was the last one for the day, and I had the other 2 already done. And it was probably late afternoon, and I started back the path, and wasn't just a normal day. And I got towards the end, and I went to swing the tractor to back it up into the spot to go back up the other side, and something caught my attention off to my right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where I stopped to turn around is where the field actually meets the woods, literally. It goes from goldenrod to trees, forest. And something caught my eye, but I put the tractor in reverse anyway and backed it up. I thought, well, I'll catch a glimpse at it while I'm backing up, and I'll stop. And I stopped, and I looked, and I thought, well, it was a bear. and it was down on all fours.
And at that time, bears wouldn't have been real common to this area either.
No. Once in a while we had one go through, but you didn't see a lot.
Yeah, so it'd be something you'd really take notice of.
Oh yeah,
if you did see a bear. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like stopped, and I never got off the tractor. I just sat there watching it, and I'm going to say it was probably a good. I'm not real good with yards and that, but I'm going to say maybe 60 to 70 yards from me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't 100, I can tell you that.
Right.
But it was probably 60 to 70 yards, and I sat there and watched it for a good 10 seconds or so, and it was like it never even paid attention that I was there. And so then the more I sat there, I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I'm getting this bird's eye view of this bear, and I'm going to watch it. And after about 10 seconds or so, it stood up. And when it stood up, it wasn't a bear. I just remember it was like I wasn't scared at the time for some reason. I just remember looking at it, and I know my heart started racing because I really wasn't scared, but I could feel my heart racing. And I looked at it, and I was like, what am I looking at? And it probably stared back at me for another 10 to 15 seconds. And I got no odor off it. I didn't smell anything. And I knew, because I've always been interested in these things.
Right.
And I've always watched movies about or programs about monsters, any type of monsters.
Sure.
And I always heard, well, they have a stale smell or frank smell to them. I never got a whiff of them, but I sat there and it just kept, I don't know if it was a guy, a boy or a girl or what, but it was like, kept looking at me. And it finally just turned and like walked away. Like I'm not paying any attention to you, you know?
No.
And he just felt like he wasn't in any threat of any kind. And actually at the time I didn't either, until I watched it till it disappeared. And it never got back down on all fours again. And I never knew a bear to walk that far on its back feet. I know they can walk a ways on their back feet, but this thing walked.
Right.
I watched it till it disappeared. It was probably over 100 yards by the time, because the hill doesn't drop off for the point I watched it till at least another 100 yards. But he just kept getting smaller, but I kept watching it, and it like disappeared.
Oh my gosh.
And then as I started back up the trail again, then I started shaking, because I was like, what did I just look at? And I was like, kind of sped the tractor up to get back up towards the house. I never said anything to anybody, because I thought, first of all, they're going to tell me I'm full of,
right.
What. And, but,
when you saw it, was the lighting such that you could make out any particular feature or any definition or facial features or anything?
Its face was you couldn't really. It's like the face was covered in hair.
Mm-hmm.
There was no like a monkey. The monkey's face is kind of. It was hair, and it stood there, and because I was looking right at it, there was no snout on this thing,
mm-hmm.
No bear snout.
Right.
This was a flat faced creature.
Brown in color, black in color.
More black.
More black.
It was more black. Yeah, because I thought it was actually a black bear.
If I realize this was a long time ago and you're on a tractor when everything goes down and stuff, but if you had to guess a size on it, could you guess a size on it as far as possible?
Everything's pretty frozen in my mind, because, like I said, I've always been interested in those things, and everything's pretty. It was like, when I think about it, it was like yesterday. And I know it was years ago, and there'll be a time probably when I do start forgetting stuff about it. But it was here about the size of these things. It was definitely over 6.5. It was probably 7 foot tall.
Yeah.
7 to 7.5. As far as its build went, it wasn't extremely huge.
Right.
Now heard some people saying, it was 4 foot at the shoulders from one side. This one wasn't 4 foot at the shoulders. It was probably, it might have been 3 foot at the shoulders.
And I mean, just as conjecture, like maybe it was a female that would account for the not super massive width, and maybe being a bit more docile.
Maybe.
Or things could have turned out differently maybe if that was a male too, so it's probably a good thing it was a female.
Yeah, that might not have been a good. I might have been going a little faster than her at that time. Because I was definitely, but if it was a female, she wasn't at least a bit interested in what I was doing. She had a mission, and she was going to take care of herself.
Yeah.
But like I said, it was still probably, I wouldn't, I mean, it was a good size, it was a good size creature.
Yeah.
There was nothing I'd want to walk up to.
Right.
Like I said, it was a good, probably 7 foot tall at
Yeah.
least. And because I actually a couple days later walked down in there, and I never, don't ask me why I didn't do this, but I never thought to look for footprints.
Mm-hmm.
I went down to the area where I saw it, walked over to where the trees were and about how high its head was, and it was definitely had a couple feet over me easy.
Yeah.
And but as far as saying it was 8 foot or something, I can't tell you that, but
Oh,
it was
man.
at least 7. And it probably, it was all 250 probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 250, 260.
Yeah.
And it was, now at that point I wasn't. I weighed about a buck 45 at that time. But I was definitely the way I look at myself now is definitely bigger than I was.
Yeah.
Even its leg size, arm size, and its arms, its hands stopped between its hips and its knees. I mean, it literally. Now that's one thing I couldn't tell because I could not tell how big the hands were.
Right.
I just knew that those were their arms, and the hands were at the end of them.
Yeah.
And but it was real scraggly. I mean, it was black, had black hair. Like I said, you couldn't hardly tell its facial features. Just kind of a roughed up unit.
Yeah. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're said to be very neat, and other times they're said to be all gnarly and matted up.
Yeah, that's what it was, like real matted up and shit. It was nothing. It would look like they'd been having a rough time of it.
Yeah. Do you feel like that you had made eye contact with it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it made eye contact with me. Because, like I said, I watched it for a good 10, 15 seconds. And I know it seemed like shorter than that, but I know thinking back that it was at least 10 or 15. It seemed like it went like that. But I can remember I was just sitting there and I thought, well, this is a pretty cool deal. I wish I had a camera to get a picture of this bear. Now I wish I had that camera. I got a picture of something else. But it stood up on its feet and it stood there looking at me. And I know that it saw me because the tractor was running. It probably heard the tractor running.
Oh, sure.
And it was probably trying to make out what I was, because being part of the tractor, sitting up on the seat, and it couldn't see, but just from the top of my head to my waist. The rest of it would be in front of the seat and the gears, stuff like that. So it was probably trying to figure out what it was looking at.
You know, isn't it interesting? Did you ever consider if you wouldn't have been perched up high on that tractor, if you'd have been just some kid out there walking fishing, you probably would have never seen it, and you would have walked right by it and never even have known it was there.
Well, like I said, I was turning around.
Yeah.
If I had kept going straight, the path was longer, I probably wouldn't even look, because I was trying to make sure the path is cut the way it's supposed to be cut.
Right.
Even though there's 2 swaps to it, I just, there's rocks and stuff, roots. I didn't want to be tearing blades up from underneath the deck,
Yeah.
And so if I would have had to have gone farther, I would have never saw it. But it just happened to be right at the turnaround, and it was like dead smack in the middle, right where the field stops and the forest starts.
Oh man, that's so.
And it was like the coolest thing, and it actually took me a couple years till I got older. Then it got to be in my late teens. Then I wasn't quite as afraid anymore. But being a young teenager and that, and seeing what I saw, I was like, I mean, even after that point, my grandmother was still alive and living behind us, and my dad would send me up there at 11 o'clock at night to check on her. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. 7 foot, still 7 foot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Were you able to tell many people or anyone about this, or did you just kind of keep it to yourself? Or
I kept it to myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do.
Because when I can remember being young anyway, kids are kids, that I can remember telling, not that I didn't have a little white lie now and then,
right,
trying to make some little kid had a story, but I had to come up with one better
sure.
than that. But
it's part of being from Appalachia.
Yeah, I can just remember though that you could come up. I had several stories. One in particular of a family going to Florida, and we lost our brakes in the Kentucky mountains, and we almost had a 400-foot drop. Or if we went 3 more, we went 3 more feet. And I told that story at school, and the teacher even said I was lying. So my dad had to get down to school and straighten her out, because it really happened. So I thought, I'm not going to go to school and tell my friends what I saw. They're going to tell me that I'm so full of it.
Right.
And they're going to be making fun of me and everything else, so I'll never hear the end of it. And so, and I never even told my family, and until recently I thought I had told my wife, but
We found out otherwise
Yeah.
very recently.
Yeah, she told me she'd never heard this story after 20 years of marriage.
Well, I know, like initially when you first started telling me your story and stuff, I know it seemed like you were very hesitant to tell me, and I really appreciate you telling me and coming into. That's really awesome. Uh, do you have any idea in that exact area where your sighting was, any of the whys, like what it would have been doing? Do you feel like maybe it was hunting or gathering or rearing young or looking, or it could have been a male too, we don't know, but any ideas on what it might have been doing there, or just simply observing you?
Like the time when I said when I first saw it, it was down on all fours, and I could have been in there eating crab apples. I don't know. It could have been just chowing down. And I mean, there was some apple trees back here that weren't crab apples, but they always had just like green apples on them and stuff. So when even though we were told to get stomach aches, we used to go back here as kids and eat these sour green apples all the time. And so it could have had a heck of apples. It was.
Remember, you could take those and you could have one on the end of the stick and you can whip your buddies with
it.
Yeah, it's good times.
Yeah, we got in trouble for doing that a few times. But yeah, it could have had some apples there. But like I said, it was definitely scrounging on the ground for something. And for the life of me, I guess I just didn't think about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like I said, I went back and never thought to even look for footprints. And that was like the dumbest thing.
Oh, it's a pretty traumatic experience. I wouldn't beat myself up too bad over it.
I was just kind of curious. I went back. I was just trying to figure out how tall it was at that time, but I've never experienced anything. So I can tell you another thing that I did experience that it just came to my mind was a couple times when during the time when we were hearing the screaming.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, it could be in the middle of the night when we're all sleeping. And this happened probably at least 3-4 times. We hear something smack the side of our house. And
classic
behavior.
Just
everybody, I mean, it woke you up right now, and it was loud. And of course, my dad always had a shotgun next to the bed, and he'd take right off out the door, and there was never anything out there.
Yeah.
We'd turn on the outside lights, you'd never see nothing, and then a couple weeks later, we'd be sleeping again, or it'd be just before bed, we'd be watching TV or something, and bang, right on the side of we thought maybe there was birds flying into the sides of the house, and stuff like that, but that after dark, and number one, if it is a bird, how big a bird is it's going to make that kind of a noise?
Well, the other famous one is, that's the house settling.
Yes.
This house has been sitting here for 100 years.
And now it's settling.
Yeah, now it's going to start settling. Yeah, I hear that one an awful lot.
Yeah, that was one of the things he used to say, the house is settling.
It's way more comfortable to think your house is sinking than to think that Bigfoot's outside, I guess.
You must have been in some serious denial or just didn't believe in it or anything like that.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what the older folks really thought.
Well, because my dad and his brother were the only two boys. There was no sisters or anything, and they all grew up in that area.
Yeah.
And back then, being that young, and they were all in the, even as teens, loggers and stuff like that. And
rough people.
Yeah. And everything was in the woods, working in the woods. And he just never brought up, I mean, it wasn't until just a few years before my dad passed away that he actually started telling me stories of the war that he was in. And he never talked about it.
Yeah.
Never.
It's a generational thing, like my folks, probably the same age as your folks. And, I've heard the tales. My mom would joke around and say, stay out of here, because of such and such monster that's down there. Well, years and years go by and I find out, hey, you know what? That's a really good Sasquatch area. So maybe that's the monster the old people were talking about when we were little kids. You just don't know. Or maybe they just never said, and maybe they did know something. People were just different, the older folks. They kept a lot of things in.
Yeah, because there's definitely... I know they hung this one area, I won't mention, but they hung around there a lot. And it was by a bridge at a creek. A good-sized bridge. And
an old bridge? A real old bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my friends and other people that I know that weren't necessarily, I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't friends, it was just associates or whatever, that were down in this area at nighttime would experience things. And I'm thinking, why are we experiencing things down in this area when I know they were down there a lot
Oh yeah.
because they fished.
And
That's all they
before-
did growing up before school.
Before television was invented too, and video games and cell phones, people were going to be in the woods, especially young people. They're doing things.
They got up in the morning and fed the cows and the
Yeah.
chickens, and then they went fishing, and then they went to school. That's how early they got.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fact.
And it's like, so why in this area that I know of, and I'm thinking nobody's ever said anything. Neither one of them, my dad or his brother.
Yeah.
And but so it makes you wonder if they ever.
It's a shame nobody wants to listen to you don't want to listen to the old people until you're the old people, and by then you can't listen to the people older than you because they're gone. Too soon old and too late smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, John, we sure appreciate you coming in and sharing your experience with us. We had a great time.
Appreciate you having me here.
Oh man,
It was just kind of nice to actually tell the whole story to somebody. And like I said, I've kept it to myself, and I really haven't told my wife the whole story. But it's something that keeps bottled up inside of me, and it'll probably stay bottled.
And you can't discount the fact that you can be helping a lot of people too, because there's a lot of John Does out there that have had their own experience, and they feel much like you. They don't have an avenue. They think they're the only one. They feel isolated. They don't want to say because of the ridicule. So that's awesome that you come forward, and I think you're doing a lot of people a great service. So thanks again.
Yeah, well, thank you.
All right. Well, have a great night, my friend. Be well.
All right, thanks.